mysterious. Well, hey y'all, how's everybody doing today? Where y'all listening from? Drop it down in the comments if you would, and smash that subscribe button for me. Today's Bigfoot encounter comes to us from Danny. He begins, "It was in 1979. I had two large grows going at the same time in Northern California. For the sake of these listeners of yours, let me explain that a grow is a small parcel of land where an individual or group of individuals are growing marijuana. At the time, I'd been involved in such activities for a number of years and had been very successful in doing so. My average yield was somewhere north of 500 pounds of weed annually, netting me in the neighborhood of $100,000 to $150,000. Which was quite a lot of cash back in the 70s. At the time, I already owned my own home, having built it with cash, and I wanted for nothing. It was in August of that year that I realized one of the grows had been compromised. By what or who, I was uncertain. I had set numerous traps here and there, that would be triggered should anything 5 feet tall or greater walk into or around the grow, and a number of them had been set off. It was time to move. I had never been busted, and I was not about to get stupid and allow that to happen now. It was common practice for the cops to try to catch the growers in the act of tending to the weed by laying in wait for them after the grow had been discovered. And whether or not it was police or hunters, I didn't know, but the risk was too great. If caught, I could do 10 years in jail, easily. The following week, I'd hired a pilot at a local airstrip to take me up north under the notion that I was scoping out some new hunting grounds. Of course, he didn't care what I was doing and had no idea that I was actually looking for a new grow location. We took to the air in an old Aeronca, I don't know how to pronounce that word, and flew north of my current location about 20 miles. We'd been circling low over a number of locations, and I'd seen a number of spots that looked very promising. Our flight ended, and we came back to the airport to land. The week after my aerial stakeout, my partner in crime, Terry, and I had began our trek up into one of the areas that I had seen from the sky. As we got nearer to what I had seen from above, this was some of the tightest and thickest growing brush I had ever encountered. If it wasn't for Terry being with me, I would have called it quits and turned back. But Terry, being the eternal optimist, said that we should keep trucking through it, and we may just stumble across something really good. I was already realizing that I was covered in ticks, and the thought of coming in and out of here was not very appealing. I have mentioned that I'm the type of guy who could be dropped into just about anywhere blindfolded and find my way out. But in this brush, I was already getting turned around, as far as my bearings were concerned. I stand about 6 feet tall, and most of this was at least a foot or two taller than me. As we were just fighting our way through, we stumbled across a large grouping of trees leaning against each other in the middle of this mess. There was one large tree in the middle that was still alive, and there must have been 20 or more dead trees leaning against it, forming something like a teepee. What this was doing here was beyond comprehension of either of the two of us. for certainly no man would have come in here to create such a thing. It was obvious to us that these trees didn't just randomly come to be here. They were placed here and in very deliberate fashion. As we continued to fight our way through, we came out to the perfect opening within the forest for our grow. It had excellent sunlight and soil and was very fertile. Terry and I sat down and devised a plan. We decided that if we left enough of the most difficult brush to navigate in place, followed by making a path with machetes beginning, say, 100 feet into the crap, that it would be sufficient to deter anyone from even looking any further and finding our grow. One of the biggest problems for operating a grow is that the watering of plants. It's particularly important when they're young. So you either have to have a means of bringing water into the area or a way to capture rainfall and make use of it. Our belief was that there was adequate rainfall here based on the moisture content of the soil. So, over the next few days and weeks, we'd set up several rain catches using sections of black pool covers suspended on ropes between branches, funneling the water into 5-gallon fuel cans. Over the first several weeks, our seedlings were sprouting, and we were, in fact, gathering enough water to keep them growing. We knew that once they got deeply rooted, they would be fine in here. But we had to keep close tabs on them as they were getting started, and so we did. This little field, or opening, if you will, was very soft on the feet. It was somewhat spongy, and our footprints could be seen everywhere as the weeks progressed. We had about 400 plants growing strong, and even if 20% of them turned out to be females, we were going to make a lot of money in here. It must have been about 4 weeks into this new grow that Terry and I had decided to spend some time to take a closer look at the surrounding woods. We'd hiked north about 4 miles with our machetes in hand, fighting our way tooth and nail for the first mile through the same brush we had encountered coming in. The good thing was that very few, if any, people would be willing to go through such an ordeal to find our grow, or to start their own. In that regard, we felt fairly secure with our location. It was about 4 miles out, as I say, when I ran across yet another of these odd tree structures. It was virtually identical to the one we had seen coming in on day one. Again, there was what I'll call a central tree with possibly 20 or 30 smaller trees leaning up against it, forming this teepee style or teepee type of arrangement. As we surveyed this new structure, we noticed that 2 of the trees were freshly taken from the woods. In fact, we could see that they had been torn or twisted out from the roots. The thought of what or who would be able to twist even a small tree out of the ground was perplexing, to say the least, and yet, there they were before our eyes. These 2 trees in particular had a diameter of about 4 inches, at least. Even at that, I couldn't comprehend what would have the strength to uproot such a tree. Then the thought came to mind, why bother uprooting when there was so many deadfall trees scattered around in the forest for the taking? During the week that followed, the area had about 2 inches of rainfall. We had 3 sections of pool cover set up to catch and funnel the rain down into several military-style fuel cans. And we really didn't need the water in here, but this was more or less put in place for when the seedlings were getting started so that we could water them if need be. We knew that these cans would be full to the overflowing when we arrived. But as we made our way to the grow, all 3 of the cans were laying on their sides in the field. Try and pay attention to what I'm about to tell you next. Even if these cans had accidentally tipped over, the pouring spout was centrally located on the top of each can, meaning that most of the water would pour out, but there would still be a couple of gallons laying on each side in each can below the spout's level. Having said that, all the cans were bone dry and had been moved from their positions under the catch-alls that we had set up. As we stood there looking, our first thought was that our grow had been compromised and the cans had been left as a calling card, so to speak. By whoever done this, we don't know. It was then that Terry said to me, "Check out these footprints over here." This spot was a particularly soft area of the grow, especially after the considerable rainfall that had occurred. As the two of us started looking around, we could see what appeared to be 3 different sets of footprints, each like that of a man's bare foot. The largest was well over 24 inches, and the smallest was about 12 inches in length. We said the same thing at virtually the same time. Bigfoot. That explained why the water cans were empty. These creatures had physically picked them up and drained them, drinking the contents or dumping them out. The findings of these prints had also shed some new light on just what exactly the tree structures were that we had come across. We'd set up our grow in the middle of a family of Sasquatch. From that day forward, Terry and I were carrying sidearms when we'd come into the area. We had a discussion among ourselves as to whether or not we should abandon the crop. And the consensus was that as long as they were not damaging the plants or trying to harm us, we would continue on with our plan. I'm going to fast forward here for the sake of the story's continuity. About 3 months had gone by. Our plants were now about 5 feet tall, and they stank. We could smell this grow downwind a mile away. To us, it was the smell of money. We hadn't seen or heard anything in regards to these Sasquatch, whose prints we had seen. We also hadn't reset the water cans in place since the drinking incident had occurred. As we were hiking and closing in on the grow site, we started to hear what sounded like grunting coming from both sides of us. Now understand me, please. We had carved a trail out with machetes, and other than that trail, the brush on either side of us was higher than our heads and so thick you couldn't see more than 3 or 4 feet to in either direction. Whatever was making these grunting sounds was also making quite a bit of noise walking through this brush. There was no way you or I or anything else could walk through this mess quietly. It was then that we started to hear some sounds like that of an owl or some low-volume whoops. Back and forth they were going, and Terry and I had stopped in our tracks. Terry and I looked at each other as if to say, "This isn't going to end well." Having seen nothing, we both knew that we were being flanked by the Sasquatch, whose prints we had seen. If they decided to rush us, we'd be dead for sure. Terry said to me, "We got 2 choices as I see it. We can abandon the grow right here and right now and lose everything. Or, why don't we shoot some rounds into the air and try to warn them off?" I wasn't sure at the time if this would turn out to be really bad or really good, but when they say that money is the root of all evil, I can certainly say that statement is true. The only thing I could think of at the time was losing $100,000 or perhaps $200,000 in reefer because of some Sasquatch. The 2 of us withdrew our pistols and fired a few rounds into the air in succession, after which everything became dead silent. We stood our ground for about 10 minutes, and there was not a sound to be heard. We continued into the new grow and spent the rest of the day tending to the plants. Later that afternoon, the walkout was uneventful. It was 5 days later, when we were on our way back into the site, when our eyes would be opened to what I will call revenge. As we made our way through the uncut barrier and had just gotten onto the machete trail, we were immediately confronted with several good-sized trees that were piled across our trail. To me and Terry, this said to us immediately, "Get out and stay out." Now, you'd think we would have taken the hint, but no such luck. We continued to make our way into the grow, and when we came out into the clearing, the site looked like someone had gone through with a steamroller. Every single plant was thoroughly smashed into the ground and/or uprooted. The water cans were gone, the pool cover sections were torn down. It was complete and utter destruction. Sasquatch footprints were all over the place, in the thousands. They must have spent hours tearing apart and stomping our grow into oblivion. Terry and I turned and walked straight back out the way we'd come in. We couldn't wrap our heads around why they hadn't put a stop to our presence right from the get-go. They could have stomped out our seedlings into the earth and been done with it, but it wasn't until the plants had begun to bud and get real stinky that the action had begun. Perhaps it was the firing of the shots that set things off. We were getting so freaked out with them flanking us that I don't believe we could have stayed anyway. It's funny, but we had been running this operation for over 6 seasons and in some extremely remote locations. The only creatures we'd ever seen were elk, deer, bear, and one cougar. We did, however, hear tales of Sasquatch sighting by a couple of dudes in a bar one night, but thought it to be a drunken tale. Of course, now we know otherwise, having had the experience for ourselves. Well, that was our experience with the Sasquatch at the illegal grow site in Northern California. Well, do you think the Sasquatch took offense to the gunshots? Seems to me they didn't like it too much. Have you had a Bigfoot encounter? Or encounter with any cryptid? Or had any kind of mysterious experience? I'd love to hear about it. You can shoot me an email at cryptidmysterious@gmail.com. And I'll see you in the next one.